There we go, and hello to everybody who's watching this recording back at a later date. So we are really looking forward to getting started with today's session on countering hate and misinformation online. So let's take a look at what we have got planned for you. And before I go through the agenda, I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that the topic of misinformation and hate, it is a really difficult one. And for lots of us, it might carry a lot of weight and a lot of emotions. So I do just want to warn you that we are going to be talking about some difficult topics today, and I hope we do so in a really constructive and helpful way. But if you do need to, step back, take a break at any point, if you just need a moment, that is absolutely understandable and fine. We would obviously love for you to contribute to the discussions that we have got planned, but again, there's no pressure to do so if you don't feel comfortable doing that. And if you do feel that you need any additional support or you'd like to talk to somebody more about any of the things that we share today, please do book a one-to-one with our coaches. We sadly all at Light4 here have got first-hand experience of dealing with misinformation and online hate whilst we're working at nonprofits too. So that does mean that we can help because we have dealt with that firsthand. So let me take you through the agenda. We have got two discussion points during our workshop today. We're going to be talking about the issue of hate and misinformation online. We're going to be unpacking some key terms and sharing some tools and techniques to help you to deal with this on your channels, as well as to work to counter the spread of misinformation and disinformation. And we will obviously, as always, have time to take any questions. We'll be saving time at the end, but like I mentioned earlier, feel free to ask your questions at any point. We always want to hear from you. And I think I know everybody on this call, but if you don't know me, my name is Sabina. I'm one of your digital communication coaches here to help you in these live sessions. Before working at Light4, I worked for 12 years in nonprofits. And whilst there, sadly, did have to deal with both misinformation and hate online. Which is just, a terrible thing to deal with. There's no really sugarcoating that, but it does mean that we've got some tips and some tricks and some strategies that we can share to help you. It's not just me on the call though, I'm also joined by Jasmine, so let me hand to her to introduce herself.
Thanks, Sabina, and hi everyone. I hope you're having a good morning so far. I think I know lots of you as well, but my name is Jasmine and I'm digital training lead here at Light4. Similar to Sabina in terms of experiences dealing with this topic. Early on in my career, I started out working in social media. So I was doing a lot of community management and actually just dealing with comments for a UK-based bank. And it actually just really surprised me how much hate we would receive targeted at staff, at people in our adverts, and every day I would just have to filter through all of that, which just I think really surprising that people would actually sit there, take the time to write that, send that in to what was actually like a really big company. And yeah, it just made me realize how people behave in such an unacceptable way online. We'll share a bit more about this later, but it's something that I really care about too. So always happy to meet with anyone individually to talk about this further afterwards. And we're also joined by our lovely colleague Jamie as well. So she'll be keeping an eye on the chat. She'll be available for any technical or access needs that you may have if you need to reach out to her. And we'll also be sharing some useful links in the chats a bit later on as well. So let's look at our learning outcomes for today. And we'd really like for everybody today to learn to recognise the key forms and tactics of misinformation. And we'll come on to this, but I'm sure it's something that all of us have witnessed, probably increasingly so. So hopefully we can help you in being prepared for that, and then to feel confident responding to hate or to false claims online that we may have to deal with on behalf of our organisations, and then to take away tools and resources to protect your organisation's digital presence as well. So hopefully that sounds useful for everybody here. And we're going to unpack some key terms, but just before we do that, I'm going to launch a poll initially, just to do a bit of a temperature check and see, have you seen or read hateful comments online? And also, how confident do you feel about managing negativity in your online spaces? As I know that kind of experience can really vary for different organisations and depending on what you're used to on social media. Well, thanks everybody for voting. Yeah, very sadly seeing that so far everyone has seen or read hateful comments online, which is super sad, and I think is such the reality that we live in at the moment, which was just not the case when people first started out using social media, and kind of what that has become can be quite a negative space. I think something that I feel really passionately about is using the space to spread positivity, to spread things like the work that you're doing, and being able to kind of counter that with positive messages. And something that I think is really important that all of you on the call here today have that presence, and your organisations are able to spread that amongst your audiences, and kind of hopefully to outweigh that negativity that we all see. And in terms of confidence, I can see we've got a bit of a range, roughly falling around the middle. As we go through, like Sabina said, we'll be sharing our own advice. But if you've had experiences where you're able to share some advice as well, then that would be really helpful to hear. So do feel free to contribute as and when. And then when we're talking about these difficult things, I think it's really helpful to define what we're talking about and make sure that we're all on the same page. So we're going to start with some key terms to look at, just defining them. We're going to start with some key terms around misinformation. With all the benefits that the internet has brought us, sadly, it is also easier than ever to spread false information, which I'm sure we've seen lots of. So let's pull up some words to define. Firstly, we've got misinformation. This is the false information that's spread, often unintentionally though, which I think is really important, because I think I often forget about this element where some people will be spreading information that's resulted from misunderstandings, from them being falsely informed themselves, sharing outdated information, misleading content. And this plays a really big role in contributing to general sense of confusion and debate online, even though the people sharing it may not actually mean to do so in an actual malicious way. And the difference between misinformation and disinformation lies with intent. So misinformation is that unintentional spread of inaccurate information, often shared in good faith by people that are unaware that it's false. But disinformation is more about the deliberate lies, the misleading narratives that can be weaponized over time with the outright intention to deceive, manipulate, or harm. So those are some differences there, but often it is the same content, the same information that is being shared via those means. And then to debunk is to show that something is not true, or perhaps that it's less true than it was made to appear, that people might have perhaps perceived it incorrectly. So really it's explaining what's incorrect about some information that might be circulating. Fake news, I think, is a term we're probably all super familiar with now, but really about fabricated, intentionally deceptive news stories that's presented as fact or as journalism. And these stories now often even appear in traditional media, online platforms. They're designed to mimic legitimate news reports. Perhaps they find their way into actual news reports, but really the main aim of this fake news is to mislead readers, to manipulate public opinion, generate sensationalism, generate confusion, for various reasons, perhaps political, financial, ideological motives. So that's kind of a little bit behind the misinformation side of things. And then moving on, we've got the darker side, I guess, of the digital channels and social media, even more so. And this has really grown, I think, due to people being able to post with so much anonymity and not actually seeing any real life consequences of things that they write online, even though that we know that there are consequences of these things. So firstly, we have hate speech. This is anything that promotes or incites violence, discrimination, hostility, or prejudice. And this often targets marginalized or vulnerable communities, but it can, of course, have severe real-world consequences, which people often don't realize. Then online abuse is harmful and malicious actions, so things like cyberbullying, constant harassment, threats, trolling, doxing, which is revealing someone's private information online, but really any actions that are intended to intimidate people and within the online environment. And of course, that can take a huge toll on people involved. And we often talk about online trolls, and this is people who engage in disruptive, provocative, antagonistic behaviour on the internet, often posting inflammatory content, offensive comments, engaging in personal attacks, and really deliberately disrupting the online spaces. And they can really vary actually in terms of why they do it. Some people actually just enjoy it. It's perhaps the thing about getting attention, causing that chaos, and there's a mixture really of motives behind that. And then the final one is spam. Most simply, I guess, just repeatedly posting the same content. It can just be annoying, like it can just be someone posting the same thing over and over, but it can be malicious, it can be promoting a scam or repeated message. So I know at the nonprofit I used to work, people would always comment on our posts with links to, I guess like scam finance services and things that they would be like, oh, you know, you can get help, get money, and really preying on people who would be reading through the comments. But that's some key terms, some all quite, uninspiring terms. We're going to have a look now at the techniques used to spread disinformation. It's not just what's said that matters, but how it's framed and how it's delivered. So looking at how disinformation actually works, it's how it's spread and how it actually persuades consumers, I think, which is really important. So most misleading or false content online isn't just random, it's actually relying on those specific tactics designed to grab our attention, to shape emotions, to distort our understanding, and to confuse people as well. And at the heart of this is really emotional manipulation. Often you probably see when you get that disinformation or fake news appearing online, it's created in a way that really provokes strong feelings, whether that's anger, fear, moral outrage, thinking about those like sensational headlines you might see. And that's because emotion spreads faster than facts. And so you'll see content that feels urgent, alarming, personal. And I've even been caught out by these things where you see a headline, you're like, oh, I can't believe that, that's terrible. And then you stop and think, and oh yeah, actually I shouldn't believe that, but it's provoked something in me that's made me think that it's true. And actually, something I know about the social media algorithms is where they will be more likely to show you content that provokes strong feelings, particularly feelings of anger, because that will actually make you spend more time on the platform, which is really quite depressing. But that's kind of how they'll be filtering content as well. So that's a way that they use emotions and also play to the algorithms to get more people to see those things. And another common tactic is using so-called experts, so people who look credible, but maybe they don't actually have any of the right qualifications or expertise. And so they can make false claims seem trustworthy at first glance. And then cherry picking data, so selectively using statistics that seem convincing but really leave out the full picture. And we can probably think of examples that we see in our own feeds of these sorts of things. Conspiracy framing is another thing. So this is suggesting that there's a hidden agenda, suggesting that there's maybe a cover-up taking place, a powerful group pulling the strings. And so it makes people feel like they've discovered the truth and that they're kind of really understanding what's actually going on when what they're reading may be entirely false. And there's also something called whataboutism, which is where someone avoids addressing a real issue by just pointing at something else. So thinking about what about this thing and just deflecting, distracting people from the main issue. And then false balance, so fringe views might be presented as equally valid to well-established scientific consensus, creating the illusion that there's some kind of controversy when there isn't one. I think I see that lots in my social media feeds of people kind of pulling up this really niche argument and making it sound like that's kind of the main thing that everyone's talking about. And then some disinformation campaigns go even further, which what's called astroturfing, which is fake grassroots support using coordinated bots or fake accounts to make an idea look more popular than it actually is. So you might see loads of comments on something saying like, yes, I've seen this too, I agree, here's my story. Sometimes they all look awfully similar, might have been posted around a very similar time and you kind of cotton on. But then also people might additionally use misleading visuals. So we've probably seen lots of those out of context photos, edited, now even more so with like deep fakes, AI generated content, all looking legitimate at first glance, but actually designed to mislead people. And these tactics might change over time, particularly as technology evolves, but the patterns are quite consistent. So you'll see exaggerated fear, attempting to erode trust in science institutions, and really appealing to that emotion over evidence. And sometimes it all looks very professional and convincing, especially when you kind of scroll through, and the rate that we consume content online is so fast that you can just consume it and not quite realize that that perhaps wasn't true. But actually, the more familiar you are with these tactics, the easier it becomes to spot misinformation in the wild, in your own feeds, which then helps you help your own communities to stay informed, grounded, and resilient in the face of it. So if you know what you're up against, and you can proactively make efforts to ensure that people aren't fooled by that information, yourselves included. And we're going to look at some real world experiences now. So I'm going to hand over to Sabina for that.
Thanks, Jasmine. Yeah, that was a lot of very intense definitions. So in a moment, I'm going to be opening up the floor and giving everybody at this workshop today an opportunity to share which specific challenges that you're facing, whether that is misinformation or hate speech or targeted attacks. But before I do, we've got some examples to share with you. So online hate, it is worsening largely because online platforms have really minimized the activity around combating hate. Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter, now X, that saw the removal of safeguards on that platform to prevent the spread of misinformation. And this started a trend that other social media platforms have followed, with Instagram and Facebook and YouTube revising their methods of content moderation and laying off staff that are responsible for moderation. And Trump's re-election has created an environment in which online hate is thriving, not just in America, but globally. And then there's the rise of generative AI. Despite its many benefits, it also makes misinformation easy. It allows the creation of deepfakes, which are those highly realistic images and videos and audio that fabricate events or they impersonate individuals. So those are just some of the factors that are at play when it comes to misinformation and hate online. And yeah, I've got those examples ready to show to you next before we do open up the floor to you. So, a report into online hate and harassment, the American experience, and this was in 2019, found that more than half of Americans believe that online hate and harassment are making hate crimes more common. And 22% said that they feel less safe in their community as a result of online hate. I think that visual makes it kind of really hit home. And it's also really interesting to think that that is 2019, that's 6 years ago, and things have really escalated since then. And then another report, this one was by the International Broadcasting Trust, took a close look at how fake news is affecting the charity and humanitarian aid sector. And this highlights that the growing connection between misleading journalism and a decline in public trust towards NGOs, and shows how that loss of trust can have really serious real-world consequences. So the report included examples from across the sector, ranging from malicious falsehoods targeting individual staff members, and then all the way to coordinated efforts aimed at shifting those public attitudes, particularly around issues like refugee rescue and humanitarian response. So on your screens at the moment is a quote pulled from that report, and that illustrates the severity of the problem. And one key finding from that report is that NGOs are often really bearing the brunt of misinformation and fake news about their specific operations. So the report urges nonprofits to actively monitor what's being said about them online and to respond quickly when they become the subject of those false or misleading narratives. But the report also points out that it's easier said than done because fake news spreads much faster than most organisations can react. And that rapid spread can be especially damaging to public trust, and it takes a lot of a toll on staff who are left to do that responding. So, for example, the UK charity Save the Children has faced false accusations of colluding with human traffickers, and Doctors Without Borders shared in their report that fake news can be life-threatening to their staff. So those examples are a really powerful reminder that misinformation doesn't just undermine reputations, it actually endangers lives, and it hinders the really critical work on the ground. And the last example I'm going to show you for now, this is a video, and it's quite an unsettling piece of media. So in 2019, Channel 4, which is a television channel in the UK, they aired a special advertising break to draw attention to the rising levels of online abuse. So to highlight just how widespread and personal the issue has become, they partnered with several of their advertisers to rerun commercials that they had already run previously, but with a twist. So in this version, each advert is overlaid with the actual abusive comments that were posted online in response to the original campaign. So they're real comments and they're directed at real people, and they're shown on the video I'm going to show you exactly as they were written. So a content warning before I do play this video, the language is disturbing and it might be emotionally difficult to watch. And if you would prefer to mute or to minimize your screen for the next few minutes and then just rejoin us afterwards, please feel free to do so. But I will hit play on it now.
Channel 4 presents a thought-provoking ad break. At Channel 4, we stand up for diversity and inclusion. Unfortunately, not everyone agrees, and one of the dark sides of this is abuse posted online. To highlight this disturbing trend, we've partnered with some of our advertisers to show examples of real abuse received online against real people in their ads. It may shock you.
I heard that we are the most lonely society in history. Immediately I scoffed, looked at my 4-inch movie screen for how can you be lonely when everything can be done with a tap or a swipe? Just because you can, it doesn't mean you do. Often the more you can, the less you're inclined to do. It's a funny kind of ruse. Imagine there were no phones, no Facebook, no such thing as online. You'd probably find the time to meet for a cuppa and a schmooze. Strange that. I like my internet connectivity, but it shouldn't block my interconnectivity, so I try and combine the two. I'll send a message, tell a friend, put the kettle on, bruv. I'm coming round to see you for a news up and a brew.
"41% of young adults have seen racist abuse, bullying or harassment online. The following advert contains abuse." Channel 4 presents.
It always tries to play it a second time. Okay, so yeah, I'm sure you agree, really powerful video, a hard watch, but really worth just seeing to raise that awareness. But now we'd like to take a moment to hear from you online. So we'd love to invite you to share what your experiences or challenges are when it comes to misinformation. And we know this is a really complex and evolving issue, especially with that growing role of AI in generating and spreading content. So some of you might be actively working to counter those false narratives, and others might be facing, completely different challenges. Could be limited resources or reputational risk. So this now is a space to share what's coming up for you at your organisation. So please feel free to raise your hand, come off mute, or to post in the chat if you would prefer. So I'm going to open up the floor now. Would anybody like to share? I can see a comment in the chat saying, what a heartbreaking video. Yeah, I really agree. I know in the poll earlier, you all voted to say that you had seen misinformation online. So maybe it's something that you're seeing, but perhaps isn't directed directly at your nonprofit. But still, I think even encountering it has a massive impact, doesn't it? So maybe if you wanted to share any experiences you have had with whatever kind of form of misinformation or hate you have come across or come against, feel free to post in the chat or to say aloud.
My name is Tamina, and I'm just representing a doula midwife organization. We don't have a social media presence, so we haven't necessarily faced any abuse online at this point in time, but so much of it is word of mouth, which I think is such a protective factor in a way. But just, certainly I've seen on my, I'm not on social media personally either, but even in my neighborhood, right, there's like a neighborhood app, and it's just challenging to see how people disagree or how they express their disagreement. And the actions that I've seen are just really trying to stick to the facts. So people just trying not to get emotional in their responses, but just trying to kind of resume to the facts. So that's been a helpful response that I've seen online.
Thank you, Tamina, for sharing. That's really useful to hear how others are doing that kind of countering. And we are going to move on in a moment to talking about how to do that active countering. But you're completely right. Sticking to the facts, it's so important, stating the facts, not repeating the misinformation as well. But we'll talk much more about this in a minute. Yeah, and I think there's also something there, isn't there, that people feel further removed when they are, typing away on their phone, on social media, or in apps. They feel anonymous and protected, and I think that can lead to people expressing themselves in much more hateful ways than they would do if it was in person, the light was being shone on them. I can see we've just had something shared in the chat. Let's take a read of this. This is from Catherine, who says, thankfully, we rarely receive hate online. The bulk of misinformation, oh, sorry, it's just jumped, usually comes from people not understanding how to access our food pantry or pharmacy. Interesting, okay. Or people not understanding where to learn about our store events. These questions or comments are good to receive to give us a gauge of what people know about us and where we can improve our communication. That's a great way of framing it, actually, Catherine, when you are getting those kind of comments or questions or that misinformation, it gives you a chance to address it, to share the accurate information, and to look at how communications more widely can be improved as well. So great kind of positive spin on that one. Thank you for sharing. And Joshua has typed, at Madison Reading Project, we periodically receive calls from people angry about the identity affirming and inclusive books we give out in the community. It's rare, but sometimes they are just misinformed, and it leads to some pretty hateful stuff being said. Very sorry to hear that, especially you say they're giving you calls as well. So that's even, over the phone, not even just behind a keyboard. Yeah, really hateful and hard to hear, I'm sure, and hurtful. Very sorry that you've experienced that, but thank you for sharing. And Eric says it's always a challenge to know how to respond and if you should respond to negative misinformation and or complete misrepresentation. In many cases, it seems to be throwing fuel on a fire. Yes, I do understand that. Well, we're going to move on very shortly to look at how to do that response. So hopefully you'll get some good tips from that. And let's take a look maybe at this last comment. This one says from Concal, I hope I've pronounced your name correctly there. We work with people experiencing houselessness, and when they speak out, they get attacked by neighbours and others, distracting from the content and making it personal about the person, which makes it hard for people to advocate for themselves. Yeah, that's really hard, isn't it? Oh, and Kelly has also said, I see people trying to make value judgments about what people deserve, the basic human services we offer. That can be based on many things: race, employment status, legal status, length of receiving services, etc. That in their minds change whether people should be able to access a food pantry or clothing or legal support, etc. Yeah, that is something that is definitely becoming more widespread online, that those value judgments are really hard to counter, I think. It's hard to address personal attacks on people because of confidentiality, absolutely. Gosh, there's so many comments coming through. Lisa says a few years ago we received hate commentary towards a teacher. There were many false statements made about the teacher and their influence on our children, agreeing with what Brenda said about confidentiality and bringing out truths. Yeah, it's very hard to handle, isn't it, when you have got those confidentiality issues and when those real people are involved. Uh, um, oh, sorry, there's a comment on this one. So Liz is saying, similar to the comment I read out previously from Joshua. So same for Reach Out and Read on National Social received very hateful comments when sharing books on inclusivity, especially during Pride Month. And Kenya says, on my 2 years at her organisation, I haven't seen or received any hateful comments, but there was a bit of a hostile comment when we did social media ads to create awareness for our brand in promoting infant mental health, which people always assume means infant mental illness. I think the comment said something like the organisation was ridiculous because it's babies, but it just means nurturing social and emotional well-being. Yeah, I'm very sorry to hear that, but it's quite a common thing, sadly, when you are doing ads, that your content gets seen by a much wider group of people, and it does very sadly open you up. It shouldn't, obviously, but it opens you up to receiving more hate or misinformation. It's something we really experienced at my last organisation too. Whenever we had any ad campaign running or we did a boosted post, we would get just inundated. That's when the hate comments would come, or that's when the bots would come too. So it was a mixture of everything. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your experiences. Really hard to read in lots of cases there. Thank you for being so honest and open, and I hope that everybody on the call has found it helpful to hear that you're not alone in this. It's sadly a very common situation, although being directed in different ways and for different reasons. But let's move on now to look at how to do some countering of that misinformation. I'll hand you to Jasmine for that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thanks everyone for sharing. Echo. Yeah, it's really quite moving reading through all of those things at once and just thinking about yeah, I could definitely relate to that of running social media ads where I used to work with like a disaster response emergency relief organization. And so if we ran ads about an emergency fundraising appeal, we'd get a lot of those value judgments of whether certain people deserved yeah, food, basic human rights. And it's so sad to see that. And we had to then decide actually, is this drawing so much negativity that it's just distracting people, or is there an opportunity to respond and educate? And that would just differ, and that's something that we'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. And often your first instinct when you see misinformation is to kind of push back, but then you can end up repeating and amplifying that false message even if you're trying to correct it. So that's something to be careful of when you see that gaining traction. But thinking about what the alternative is and what we should actually do when we're targeted by misinformation, or what we do when we see it spreading online, we'll have a look at some practical strategies now to help respond without giving more and more kind of weight to the actual misinformation itself. And the first thing is to start with the important principle that your digital spaces are powerful tools for education. So by regularly sharing reliable information and helpful resources, then you can strengthen your credibility, you can build trust with your audiences. And so that's kind of proactively educating people which should counter the effects of misinformation that's all around. But you can go a step further as well. You can share simple tips to help people fact check content. You can share trustworthy sources, and it's really kind of equipping your community, so helping them be better at spotting misinformation, meaning that then they'll be less likely to spread it themselves and more likely to just learn to challenge it when they see it. But of course, also staying informed yourself, so understanding where misinformation tends to come from. For some of your organisations, it's quite clear there are certain topics that you see set off either that hate or actually some confusion, some misunderstanding. And so you can then monitor the certain topics. And if something comes up in the media that might attract some misinformation or hate, then you can be ready to respond with that, perhaps having clear responses prepared in advance, particularly if you know there's a particular topical issue in the press that's going to kind of have a link to your organisation. I think like that topic, I think the comment earlier about people experiencing houselessness, if that's then suddenly topical in the news, are you going to receive more negativity? And thinking about what proactively could you share to educate people, rather than having that be the thing that's circulating online. When you do see misinformation, often having a fact-based, respectful correction is a really helpful first step. So you can share accurate information, linked to credible sources, keeping that tone constructive, I think like somebody said earlier, to avoid escalating that. But something that we hear a lot from bridge participants is not being quite sure about what to do once you've corrected that. So you might reply with the facts, but what happens when they keep replying? And I think this is where having a set of standard responses and a clear approach can help. And we'll talk about this later, but that's something that I've set up for a couple of my organisations I worked at, of having this is something we agree in advance of what we do in these different situations, making sure that everyone's better equipped to manage it. Another key point is to not feed the trolls. Educating your audience is important, but some people are just there to provoke, to get a reaction. And if it's clear that someone isn't actually interested in having a good constructive conversation, it's usually best not to keep engaging. So respond once if you need, but avoid getting dragged into long threads. And then rather than having lots of back and forth in the comments, you can then use your own channels to post correct information proactively, so not giving airtime really to that false information. And of course, check your own sources as well. It can be so easy to share something quickly without realizing, especially when everything moves so quickly, but just take a moment to confirm your own facts too. But really remembering that you don't have to do this alone. I think even just seeing those comments in the conversation we've had so far about people experiencing similar situations, there's a real opportunity to team up with other people in the sector, whether that's other reputable organisations, experts, allies in your space. Working together can really help to not only increase your reach actually, but also reinforce your credibility, and give yourself some support as well. So collaboration can be really powerful in the face of all of this misinformation. And then thinking about this as well as hate speech, sometimes it can be really hard to understand quite if a comment is made as hate speech, or to identify when something is misinformation, especially when it's online. You know, sometimes there's nuances in how people write, but it is also really overwhelming to try and deal with overt hateful content. I think of those who mentioned even getting phone calls. That sounds deeply personal to have to deal with. But there are some ways that you can take a stand and make a difference as well. So we'll just show some steps about responding to hate speech as well. So to have actually effective responses to mitigate the impact of hate speech, we need to pause and analyse the situation, not respond out of a place of fear, but really understand the dynamics of hate speech and the motivation behind its spread. So we've got an approach that we'd recommend. Firstly, pausing. So when those hateful posts or misinformation pop up, taking a moment and refraining from kind of engaging in a similar tone or replying in hate to anything like that. But also just taking a moment, I think sometimes, particularly when you work in managing online community spaces, it can be very all-consuming, and actually taking a step back from the laptop just for a few minutes isn't going to make a difference to the online space, but it might make a real difference to yourself. And then fact check. So detecting false and biased information, checking the origin of the content, use fact-checking tools, search engines, and then educate. So help to raise awareness of hate speech online or offline by engaging with your followers, your family, your friends in conversations about this hateful content. I think lots of people do see it, but I think if you don't work in a space that actually brings it up a lot, people aren't as aware of it. So where I used to work and I would tell people, you know, these are some of the comments I've received today, people were totally shocked if they didn't actually work in comms or in the nonprofit space themselves. So I think having that conversation is helpful. We even had an instance where we took quite a provocative approach and called out somebody publicly for making a comment. And often that doesn't work and it might not be the best approach, but actually a couple of hours later, they sent a tweet back and said, yeah, I've just reflected on that. And that was a really unkind thing to say. I just said it. I thought it was funny. I realized now that's not something to joke about. And they actually took their post down, which I think is rare, but I think is interesting seeing when people actually think about it, that can really make a difference. And so moving on to challenge and support, you can undermine that hateful comment with positive messages. So doing more of the positivity, so spreading more about tolerance, equity and truth in defense of those being targeted by hate, and really taking a public stand for this and extending solidarity to people who are the targets of hate speech. And it just encourages people to take a moment themselves to reject hate and actually take that accountability themselves as individuals. And then report as well. So most platforms have a way to report people and to keep discussions respectful. I don't think they do enough in that sense, but I think the more we keep reporting and we keep doing that, it shows that there is a need to deal with this and there is something that social platforms should be managing. And we'll talk more about how you can do that shortly. So that's kind of a flow we would recommend using. And we're going to talk a bit more now about managing misinformation. So I'll hand back to Sabina.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think as we've really discussed today, misinformation, it doesn't just affect large institutions or governments, it really directly impacts nonprofits, and whether that is through those false claims about who you're serving or attacks on your services or misconceptions about the services you're providing or your funding, it really does erode trust and it makes your work harder. So we've got 5 practical ways that you can push back, and that starts with leading with the truth. So start your communications with clear, positive statement of your mission and your impact to set that narrative before the misinformation takes hold. And then when you are getting that misinformation, don't amplify the lie. So repeating false claims, even if you are debunking them, can accidentally spread them further. So instead, focus on reframing with the facts. And for that, you can use a truth sandwich. So this is when you sandwich the myth between 2 truthful statements. And this approach helps you correct the record without giving any airtime to the like harmful or hateful narratives. And we'll look a bit more at truth sandwiches in just a moment. And then it's also about using those trusted messengers. So this is about partnering with community members or staff or clients who really speak credibly and authentically about your work. Those local voices, they carry more trust than institutional ones can. And also stay calm and consistent. So it's hard, I know, and that's where that pausing that Jasmine mentioned earlier is really important, but responding with emotion or in panic can inflame the situation. So it's helpful here to develop a kind of calm and repeatable way to clarify misinformation across your platforms. So we'll look a bit later on about processes and kind of standard responses that you can use in that situation too. But hopefully these strategies help you to not only respond to any misinformation or hate, but also to build those long-term, build that long-term trust and resilience in your digital presence. So I mentioned truth sandwiches there. So we're going to put this all into practice now with a quick exercise. So on your screens, you can see a common piece of misinformation, which is the statement that shelters are just a magnet for criminals. So this is an example like many of us may have seen online. So we'd like to set a little task for you now to craft a response using the truth sandwich method. So a quick reminder of that structure. You start with the truth, so clearly state the correct information. Then you briefly address the myth. So without repeating it word for word, if possible, because you don't want to repeat the misinformation. And then you end with more truth. So you're reinforcing the science or the source here. So we would like for you to type your truth sandwich in the Zoom chat. I'll give you a couple of minutes and then we will read out a few examples. And if you're feeling a bit stuck, I can show you an example to kind of get the juices flowing here. So this is an example of a truth sandwich response. It's a bit of a long one, but it says, shelters help create safer communities by providing stability and support to people in a crisis. So you see that's the truth there, that's the fact. While some claim they attract crime, that's the repeat, no, don't repeat the lie, but reframe it. Then we end with another truth. Studies show shelters actually reduce harm by addressing root causes like poverty and trauma. So are you ready to have a go at a truth sandwich? I'll stop talking for a minute and let you type in the chat. How are you getting on? Has anybody got a truth sandwich they're ready to share? Yeah, you can write it about this shelter quote in particular, or if you'd rather do it about something that you have seen online or something to do with your work, then feel free. And also, if this feels like too much to do right now, then maybe it's something to have a think about after the workshop. And if you wanted to share your truth sandwich, you could post it in the WhatsApp group instead or drop us an email with it. It's really just to help you to put what we're talking about into practice. So maybe let's give you a few more seconds just in case anybody is typing up a truth sandwich. Oh, here we go. I've got one to read aloud now. A few coming through. The first one says, homeless people are more likely to be the victim of crime than criminals. While some claim homeless services attract crime, in fact, they help reduce homelessness and prevent crime. Perfect. It's succinct. It's got the beginning and the end, those bookends, the sandwich of the truth and reframed misinformation in the middle. Wonderful work there. And the second one says, immigrants provide much needed labour in agriculture and the service industry. While some believe all immigrants are criminals, studies show that immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than native. Great. That's really great. Thank you. And another one's just come through. Oh, all coming through quickly now. This next one's from Jessica, and it says, we know it might seem like the people asking for money on the streets are homeless, but actually many of them are not. It's much more common for people experiencing homelessness to be private about what they're going through. And Erica said in many cases, shelters actually reduce criminal activity with addressing basic needs such as safe, stable places to sleep and food. And a number of shelters provide supportive services like mental health care, addiction treatment, and job assistance. Amazing. It's really interesting to see how you're all crafting these truth sandwiches. They're all drawing on different aspects, but addressing the misinformation and highlighting different services and needs that are provided. I'd love to spend more time reading through all of these, but we will run out of time if we do that. But after the session, I'm going to go back through and read all of your truth sandwiches. But let's carry on now. So some more strategies for you. So addressing hate speech, it does not mean limiting or prohibiting freedom of speech. It means keeping hate speech from escalating into something more dangerous. You know, we definitely don't want it to incite discrimination or hostility or violence. We don't want it to lead to real life crimes. And we know this type of hate speech is prohibited under international law, so we do have a responsibility to respond to it correctly. So one of the most proactive things you can do to reduce your and your audience's exposure to negativity online is to create clear community guidelines for your digital platforms. So every organisation that manages an online presence, I would recommend having community guidelines in place. So even if you haven't experienced online hate or harmful comments aimed at your organisation before, it's really useful and helpful to be prepared. So this means having a clear set of guidelines that you can draw on when you need to take those steps to counter misinformation or address any hate. And these guidelines, they're sometimes called house rules. They let your audience know what kind of behaviour is expected on your digital platforms, what won't be tolerated, and how you plan to respond. So you can display them in different places. You could have them on your Facebook page in the About section. You can include them in your pinned posts on different platforms. You can even host them on your website so you can link to them easily if you need to. So for example, at my last organisation, the National Trust, we had a structured approach with our community guidelines. We would firstly issue a warning if somebody broke those house rules that we displayed on our platforms. Then if their behaviour continued, they carried on saying the same kind of things, they would get a second warning. And then after that, if they continued for a third time, we would block the user. We'd always take screenshots of any offending content, anything that broke the house rules. We'd keep them securely and safely as a record in case it was needed. And then on top of that, we also kept a set of pre-prepared responses so the team could respond quickly and consistently when we needed to without having to scramble for words in the moment. So if you have not got a kind of community guideline or house rules at your organisation, then we'd love to know from you. If you do or if you don't, post it in the chat. I can see Kenya's just said that they love the idea of house rules. Oh, that's cool. Thank you, Kenya. And we've got some resources to help you to develop house rules or community guidelines, which we'll share with you later on. And the next tip is creating a clear action plan. So map out how you respond to negativity or hate speech and put that in writing. So having that in writing really does help to reduce stress when those moments do arise because you already know what you're going to do. And then the next tip here is about supporting victims of hate speech. So when hate does appear in your community, definitely don't ignore it. Show solidarity with those targeted and use your platform to post messages of support and to counter those harmful narratives. And if appropriate, you can direct people to organisations that specialise in supporting the victims of hate. The next on your screens now is avoiding stigmatizing language, and I'm sure this is something we're all aiming to do. We're really trying to make sure our language is inclusive and respectful and up to date. This really helps to create a safe and welcoming online environment. And language norms, they evolve, so it's important to stay current. There's tools like the Oxfam Inclusive Language Guide that's really helpful. We've also recently updated our course on Lightful Academy on inclusive digital communication. I can't say that. Inclusive digital communications, and that's got lots of guidance on what inclusive communications are and how to go about communicating inclusively. So I'd recommend checking that one out. Then it's about using platform tools effectively. So staying on top of new features that help to manage abuse. There's muting and blocking and filtering comments. You can also set up delegated moderation. These tools are all there to support you. So really make sure your team is familiar with how they work on each platform. And regularly monitor your channels. So keep an eye on what's happening in your online spaces. That early detection, it means that you can intervene quicker before it kind of escalates, whether that is countering or correcting that misinformation or removing harmful content if it's needed. So remember, the goal here is not to control the conversation, it's to create a respectful, safe space where that productive dialogue really thrives. And we mentioned platform features earlier on. I know Jasmine did, and I just went through a few as well. So all internet platforms, they can unfortunately be places where people do post that hateful content. And it's also up to all of us to consider our own online content and make sure we're not crossing the line from free speech to hate speech, and also up to us to protect our spaces too. So there are some features on each platform that allow you to do that. The first is blocking. So blocking is one of the most basic abuse mitigation tools that online platforms have got in their arsenal. So blocking allows a user to prevent another user from accessing their online space. So they won't be able to post on their page, they won't be able to direct message them. So blocking somebody just stops the abuser directly. Then there's reporting. If enough accounts report a piece of content that promotes hate speech or discrimination, social media platforms often review the reported content and then they will take an action, whether that is removing it or saying that it doesn't violate their guidelines, whatever that action will be. But in more severe cases where a user is consistently violating platform guidelines or they're engaging in discriminatory behaviour, their account may be permanently removed. So it's really worthwhile to always report when you are seeing these situations. Then there's muting. So this is similar to blocking, but muting is also sometimes called hiding or snoozing. This allows users to prevent abusive comments from being seen without blocking or unfollowing people. So the abusive commenter, they'll often have no knowledge that they have been muted. So it's really useful for preventing kind of retaliation while you figure out what the next steps are going to be. And it's also helpful in de-escalation. So you can mute individuals, or even on Instagram and Facebook, you can mute certain words. So if somebody decides to post hateful comment on your page and they include those particular words that you've got muted, they won't be visible for your audience to see. And we can share some links in the chat to some steps on Facebook and Instagram about how to mute words and people. Then another thing that can be really helpful is giving delegated access to people that you trust. So this gives trusted people access to your account, including your comments and your direct messages, so that those allies can weed through the harassment instead of you. So really helpful if you are really going through it at the moment or at any point, gives you a break from reading those abusive messages if you're finding them triggering or distressing. And I guess final bit here is to just remember that when you are in that moment of panic, when you see that hate comment, just remember that all of these digital platforms, they need to incorporate the experiences of victims of online hate in product development and design. So there are measures that you can take to help limit your exposure of hate speech. And, if the platforms aren't doing enough, as we're seeing on certain platforms like X, they are seeing a drop in users and investment, and it really does harm their reputation. So it starts with having that clear response policy for negativity and misinformation. So in your social media strategy, I recommend outlining exactly how your team responds to incoming comments and questions and messages. So who replies, how fast, what tone are you going to take? And for this, it's helpful to develop a set of on-brand templated responses to the questions or challenges that you hear most often. And then remember to keep those updated so they stay relevant and authentic as things are changing. And when you are addressing misinformation or negativity, as we said before, always lead with the facts. If somebody challenges you or they spread something false, respond calmly and clearly. And even if a comment feels personal, it's rarely about you. So stay grounded in your values and focus on that constructive dialogue. If a comment crosses the line from disagreement into harassment, don't hesitate to report it. There's a real difference between somebody voicing concerns and somebody intentionally trying to provoke or intimidate. So it's okay to engage with thoughtful criticism, but inflammatory or abusive comments, they don't need to be given airtime. So this is where it's really useful to have those house rules that I mentioned earlier, or community rules, or a code of conduct, whatever you want to call it, posted on your profile to set that expectation and give you a clear basis for moderation. And to help you with this, we have created a set of guides, which I'll hand you to Jasmine to take you through.
Thanks. Yeah, to support everything that we've been talking about today, we don't expect you all to just go and remember all of those strategies, all of those tips. And we've got a practical guide, which we'll share a link to in the chat. And it's really all about the things we've talked about today, but it also includes some templates, tips, and step-by-step advice to help keep your organization, your supporters, your community safe. And it's come from all of our experiences. So we've kind of taken models that we've used before at previous organizations, templates that we've used. One of the bits I find helpful, because I've used it before, is there's a flow chart that basically helps you to just identify, what is this comment? Is it misinformation? Is it hate? Is it a really grumpy person? What do we do with that? And having templated responses. And this really takes some of that emotional energy out of it, because you've decided that in advance. So it's not every time that happens, we have to go through the whole process again of figuring it out. We've got a set plan in place that then you can equip your teams as well, which takes some of the weight off of it. But we'll share the link, and then it's designed to be something you can come back to when you need it. You can share it with your team. Anyone else who might find it helpful can access it via that URL. And then also it's important just to remember that you have support as well. So we're not in this alone. Although we have responsibility to manage our own spaces, there's a growing network of organisations across the globe working to tackle misinformation from all angles. We've just got a few on screen now. So the Centre for Countering Digital Hate looks at how social media platforms actually amplify harmful content, and they publish research and campaigns. And there's the Anti-Defamation League, which offer a wide range of anti-hate and anti-extremism resources. They do a lot of work in education, reporting. Futures Without Violence has trauma-informed resources and tools and can be really helpful for abuse prevention and community health. The National Network to End Domestic Violence also has practical safety tips around tech abuse, and this actually is probably a whole other world of how you would use tech. And I know we've worked with people before about how they might need to set up their website, their social media channels in a certain way to protect their service users, even more so than you might otherwise need to. So there's a few starting points. Those are some experts and networks that you can be a part of, so that hopefully you don't feel alone in that space. And just as we come to the end of our time together, I know we've just got a few minutes left, but I'd love to invite you to reflect for just a moment. So thinking about all the different things we've covered today, appreciate that can feel quite weighty, but what hopefully can feel quite helpful is identifying one thing that you might implement or do differently as a result of today's session. So it might be about creating those house rules we mentioned, about thinking about set responses to comments to help your team, maybe something bigger with policy, working on some of that truth sandwich messaging. Do feel free to post your thoughts in the chat. I think sometimes that can be a really constructive way to deal with this. It's such a big issue. I think Sabina and I were saying earlier, we always find this such a weighty topic to talk about, but knowing that there are little and big things that we can all do to help work towards countering it is something that I think can really help with the mindset of how we deal with it as well. But just while you're posting your kind of one actions in the chat, I'll just quickly remind you of the next steps, which are to work through the guide that we've shared. And we've got some Lightful Academy courses too. So one about dealing with hate and misinformation, and the other one about digital wellbeing, which is so important. It's so important to protect your own wellbeing. It can really get you down. It can be very all-consuming, and we know that. So we've got some guidance for you there. And if you would like to help, any help working on a process, working in more detail about any of those particular issues, then absolutely book in a one-to-one call. We're always, really happy to support you, really keen to talk further about this with you as well. But lovely to see some messages coming through. I've just launched our final poll for today while I have a look through. So Sheila's going to have a policy regarding digital hate. Yeah, I think having one in place, I remember I created one because we needed it, and that's always a bit of a frantic time, but if you can create one in advance, that can be really helpful to have. Kenya's going to be developing house rules for social media. Yeah, that gives kind of weight to then, if you do need to block someone, you've got kind of really clear steps of like, actually, if you've broken the house rules, you can't stay part of this space. Eric says, starting and ending with the truth, simple yet powerful way of staying focused on a proper response. Yeah, no, that's really helpful to see. Thank you for sharing. Some great actions. I know we're out of time, but does anyone have any questions before we wrap up? I'm happy to stick around if anyone has anything they want to ask, any specific examples where they'd like any help or support. If not, we will let you go for the rest of your days as we finish our day here in the UK. I'm glad to see that for the most of you that your confidence has increased by the end of the session, which we love to see. And if there's anything more you need in terms of resources, support, just reach out and we're here to help and be really happy to do so. But thank you all for joining. Thank you for sharing so honestly as well in what is quite a weighty topic. Really appreciate it. And yeah, like Joshua just said in the chat, it's important to talk about, so appreciate you all being willing to do so. And we look forward to seeing you all soon. I hope you have a great rest of your day. See you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.